Okay, welcome to the webinar from the IIBA Brussels Chapter. Today, we wanted to give you more insights into the renewed ECBA certification program and changes that have been introduced last month. First of all, I would like to thank our sponsor, Quaso Services. And now I would like to introduce Deirdre Caren. She is passionate about improving the business outcomes through better training, mentoring, and intentional business design. Deirdre herself, she is the founder and director of Agora Insights Ltd, a New Zealand company focusing on training, mentoring, and consulting service for business analysis and business architects. Deirdre now has learners from over 40 countries around the world who are aiming to get certified. And Agora Insights is an endorsed education provider with the IIBA and a guild accrediting training partner. Deirdre is a certified business architect and a certified business analysis professional. In her personal time, she likes painting and travel with her family, she told me already. In case you have further questions on the subject today, we will make some time at the end of the presentation where Deirdre will be so kind to give you an answer on any questions that you will have. You can put them in the chat window and we will post them in the discussion afterwards. Deirdre, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. So I'm very, very pleased to join, and thanks to both yourself and Stefan for kind of putting it all together. That's been great. So I think I'll share the screen. Oops.
You can do so.
Desktop 2. Oops. And let's start here. So can everybody see me all right? Everything's visible? Okay,
yes,
I'm assuming it
I
is.
think so.
Okay,
yeah.
good.
Yes, I see some reactions as well. So
okay,
yes.
All right, great. Okay, so today I just wanted to talk to you about the ECBA, and there's been quite a few changes. And when I work with, learners, and by the way, we're in 52 countries now. We just got a few more over the last couple of weeks. A lot of the learners want to know a little bit more around what is ECBA, and ECBA candidates are typically quite nervous because you're either entering the field or you're pretty new to business analysis. So there have been some changes, and I'm here to reassure you that there's not too much that's going to be difficult in the changes, but it is important to know how that might affect you in your learning plan for your ECBA. So firstly, let's focus on the primary chapters we have in our BABOK guide. And the BABOK guide, we look at business analysis planning and monitoring. We look at elicitation and collaboration. We look at requirements, life cycle, strategy analysis, requirements analysis, and design definition, and solution evaluation. Now, the question is, which one of these two are not in your exam? Can anybody answer that? I'm going to let you pop that in. Because it might surprise you, in ECBA, there are two large chapters. Oh, thanks, Sonia. That's correct. Great. So chapters 6 and 8 are excluded from your exam. So the first question people say, well, why should we study it? And I'm here to tell you that you should study it because it's an essential part of being a business analyst. So for those who are going through ECBA, you still want to know how to be a business analyst, but fortunately you don't have to be tested on those two particular chapters. So well done to those who who know what's going on. So these are the areas that you will be tested on. So, and I'll go through a little bit around what that all means in a minute, but fundamentally you are going to be tested on your business analysis and your and the business analysis profession. So that's your chapters 1, and then your chapter 2 around the key concept, which is your BACM model. That's definitely going to be, you're going to have some questions related to that, including the different types of stakeholders and so forth. You'll be looking at underlying competencies. Now, I'm going to go into this because this is an area where a lot of people don't realize there's questions that come out of chapter 9. And then there's techniques. Now, techniques is a large component of this. And as business analysts, you do not need to know, or those who are candidates for business analysis, you do not need to know every technique that business analysts could possibly use, but you do need to understand what techniques are out there. Then we look at the main areas for ECBA, which is business analysis, planning and monitoring, elicitation and collaboration, requirements, life cycle and requirements analysis and design definition. So there's a real focus on requirements. And as business analysts, you are looking at, ensuring that what you're going to do when you start the field, because that's the assumption that we make when we do ECBA, going into the field, is that you're at least going to be able to contribute through knowing the basic practices, being able to interview people and being able to write requirements. So that is fundamentally what they're testing you on, is saying, okay, if you're entering into the field, these are the basics that you need to know. So if we look at the primary exam areas, sorry, it's not the primary exam areas. If we look at our chapter 2, I'm going to take you through a couple of them. You need to understand your life cycle and you need to understand your BACM, because these are 2 key areas that will be covered. Will there be questions from techniques used exclusively from these 2 chapters? Okay, cool. I will add this to my list of questions. Yes. So techniques happen in multiple different areas, and I'll go into that in a minute. So although we've got a list of techniques, you still have to understand some of those definitions that might, and they are mentioned in different chapters. So in this breakdown, you can see the different chapters. So we've got 2.5%. So you really just need to know the basics around chapter 1 of your BABOK guide. And then your key concepts, as I mentioned, you need to know your stakeholders, you need to know your requirements lifecycle and your BACM. And then you've got business analysis, planning and monitoring. So that is you entering into a job and how do you set up for your planning. And then elicitation and collaboration. As you can see, the engagement that you have with stakeholders is very important in terms of what you get tested on. The requirements life cycle, so that's approvals, that's ensuring that you are prioritizing, or you at least know how to prioritize. It's also looking at your traceability, which gets asked quite often in the exams. So you don't need to worry about strategic analysis in your exam, and you don't need to worry about solution evaluation. And then the big fella is requirements analysis and design definition. Then we'll look at underlying competencies. And so although the questions are only 5% of that, I'm going to show you what that means for you. And then techniques are 17% or 18%, and that's quite significant in your exam. Now, fortunately, your exam is less than an hour. Well, and so you get asked 50 questions. And so you really just need to learn the basics when it comes to your ECBA. So you do need to memorize some things. You do need to know what's in your BABOK guide, and you do need to do what they call follow the rules. And I'll explain to you what they mean by that. And to apply for your exam, these are the requirements. So you have to ensure that you're registered. You have to have 21 professional development hours, and there are multiple ways that you can do that. We're a training provider, but you can also do that through study groups, through various means. And then you have to agree to the code of conduct and the terms and conditions. I will answer some of these questions in a minute, if that's okay. Trying to read and talk. All right, so one of the things that we look at is what I call the exam blueprint. And it's really important to understand what you're being tested on. Now, for a lot of people who study in BABOK, you kind of think of it in a way, well, I just want to study BABOK and that's all I need to know. And then I'm going to write an exam. And generally that does work, but it's not the best way to work. So what happens is that whenever there is a exam that occurs in any body of knowledge, and that could be at university, it could be at school, it could be sitting an exam for your IIBA certification, there are learning objectives. So learning objectives fundamentally wants to determine if you've understood a particular section of your BABOK guide. So as an ECBA candidate, you need to follow the rules, which means that whatever is written in your BABOK guide is the answer. So whatever your opinion is, that's not really relevant when it comes to the exam. So they want you to have, at a level 1 ECBA level, they're going to ask you questions about your practical knowledge and general awareness of the BABOK guide. Firstly, you will understand the rules. So in other words, what BABOK prescribes in terms of various areas. You would need to understand different elements in the particular BABOK guide. So you would need to understand how a technique works. You'd need to understand the different kinds of stakeholders. And then you would need to have basic knowledge. So you have to have fundamental awareness of basic skills. Now, the key here is awareness. You don't need to have ever done a root cause analysis, but you do need to know that that is something that business analysts do. And so if you're writing your exam, you need to understand that that is a key component of business analysis. And I just see a question here. No, you do not need to have an IT background, but you do need to understand a little bit about systems thinking. So the BABOK guide teaches you the profession of business analysis. It's not necessarily that you've got to be in the IT fields to do that, but obviously the two do work together. So I do want to emphasize that. So what will happen is in chapter 9, they talk about the underlying competencies, and the underlying competencies discuss what you should demonstrate in the role of a business analyst. And so for an ECBA candidate, these are the core competencies you'll be tested on. So they'll ask you a question. They'll say, what guideline would you use when identifying a requirement, for instance? And so you would need to, let me go back. Sorry, this seems to happen to me quite often. So these are the different areas where they will ask you a question based on your competency. So when you are studying, you need to understand that you are being tested on if you follow the rule, if you understand that particular chapter, element, and task, and that you have a basic knowledge, very basic, of the different tools and techniques that are presented in your BABOK guide. So that's fundamentally what you need to learn in that specific space. So I mentioned that requirements is a big component. And so if I have any advice, it's going to be ensure that you understand how the requirement schema and that you understand what type of requirement you're working with. So are you working with a business requirement or a user requirements / stakeholder requirement? I just separate them. Solution requirement, functional, non-functional, or transitional requirements. So that's one of the key things you do want to understand as an ECBA candidate. So in your chapters 7 and in chapter 2, those are discussed. And then again, in chapter 5, you will need to understand the traceability of those requirements. Another absolutely key component, and something you will be asked, the word atomic often gets asked in exams. So I say that though, and then I've had a couple of students say they never got asked that question. So take that with a pinch of salt. But what should a requirement look like? So you want to ensure that you focus in on these keywords. You want to know, what does atomic mean? What does complete mean? Consistent, concise, feasible, unambiguous, testable, prioritized, and understandable. So understanding some of the terms that are used in your BABOK guide is just as important as understanding the backstory to, you know, as to how you're being questioned. Okay, now, if you haven't seen this, you need to go to the IIBA and you need to go and check competencies, because this is very, very important. So when you write, I say write, some people say take an exam. I was just always taught to say write an exam. So that's the wording I use, but you can use the term take your exam. When you go into the IIBA site, and I'll share it when we get there, but in every single task, in every single chapter, and in every element in your BABOK guide. So those who have been studying would know how the BABOK guide has been broken down. Those who haven't started studying yet, this is just a heads up to say that the BABOK guide is functionally decomposed. It's broken down into these different areas. So for instance, in 5.1.4.1, which is the first area of chapter 5, this is around traceability. This is around the elements and the first element. So as an ECBA candidate, you need to have general awareness where you understand considering the value and relationships while tracing requirements. So can you see that the test is already presented to you? It's just not obvious in the BABOK guide or on the IIBA website. But this is what you would have to prove that you know. So remember, in your exam, you're not going to be asked every single question, but you might be asked a question related to this. So these are things that you need to understand and have a background about. And as I mentioned, you're not going to be questioned on anything in chapters 6 and 8. So lucky for you, you've got less to learn than your CBAP candidates or your CCBA candidates. But This you will find on the IIBA site, and there is a list for every single element that occurs in your BABOK guide, including chapters 1 to 9 and 10. And remember, 11 isn't part of your exam either. That's just for reference. So we use a matrix for this, which, sits in our classes around what particular learning objective occurs in what particular chapter and what you're expected to know. So we do have these tools and techniques that we use, in our training, just to show you can break it down, so you can look at how you would structure or understand the basics. So when I talk about ECBA Blueprint, what I'm trying to portray is that there is a formula behind your exam. So it's not just learning everything that's in your BABOK. You want to understand how you can use that learning to best perform in your exam. So these are things you need to consider when preparing. Okay, and then some exam tips. So firstly, ECBA is a test of your knowledge of BABOK, not the knowledge of your experience, not what anybody else has told you. You're only being tested on what you know from your BABOK guide. This is important. So even if you have been a BA for several years and you've decided now you want to do a certification, which a lot of people do, and even though they're more senior, they go and write the ECBA because they feel like that's what they want to do. You've got to remove all your history and you've got to focus on what is BABOK and learn the knowledge, the body of knowledge from your BABOK guide. Answers need to be as prescribed in the BABOK. So what's in the BABOK is the answer. And so you need to link those two together. This is why for your ECBA, there's some level of memory required in this. The questions are straightforward, so they're not meant to be complex. They are relatable. In other words, it might talk about you as a BA and you've been asked to do something. Which technique would you use? So they do, kind of join the dots, but it is pretty straightforward. Some questions come with diagrams. That does depend again on, the randomization that they have. And all questions have single statement answers. So it's not, again, it's a very, very, specific. Avoid answers that are prescriptive. So in other words, if in your exam it says, John must do this, that's the answer. That's probably not the answer. So the whole reason for this is because, remember, BABOK is a guide. It's a body of knowledge. It's not prescriptive. It's not meant to say that all BAs from day one need to work in a particular way. It is more just focusing on what those, what are the individuals, what reasoning would you do based on the knowledge that you see in your BABOK guide. So it's not a law book. Be careful with answers which say something like absolutely 100% or 0%. So just be aware that this is around reasoning and not so much around any form of absolutes or prescribed answers. Avoid terms that are not mentioned in BABOK. So they will try to trick you and say, should this be an agile? I'm just using an example. I'm not saying you will get it, but should this be an agile project? And we know that in the BABOK guide, we talk about adaptive and predictive methodologies. We don't refer to agile as your approach to take, particularly if you focus in on chapter 3 of your BABOK guide. So make sure that if you see a term, even if you recognize it from somewhere that you've worked previously, that term, if it's not in the BABOK guide, it's not the right answer. Multiple options could be technically correct, but you have to choose what is the best option. So remember, we spoke about how you would answer particular questions in terms of the structure that you have in your BABOK. You need to understand that sometimes the question will be related to a particular chapter. So even though, like if you're talking about requirements, traceability, they might trick you and give you an answer that's in a different chapter. So it could be technically correct, but if the question is around traceability and the answer or the technique or anything is not listed in chapter 5, then technically you can only choose the answer that's in chapter 5. And ensure you remember the different task names. This is very, very basic. So in your BABOK guide, all those tasks that are listed, make sure that you memorize them. I always advise this to candidates because it's not that hard to memorize the tasks. So not just the chapter names, but the tasks under each chapter. And then preferably understand the definitions. So focus on the definitions because the definitions are used in the wording. So remember that you've got to focus on the 3 rules and so forth. And yes, all the questions are multiple choice. So you don't need to write any paragraphs or do any kind of work. It's just multiple choice questions. So that in a nutshell is your BABOK guide. So I'm going to go through a couple of questions and I'm not sure, Christoph, should we kind of open this up a little bit, or is there anything I should, whoops, let me just go back a bit, reiterate.
Well, we did receive some questions.
Yeah.
Let me have a quick look. So I do have a personal question as well. Do you have any idea why they did those changes in the ECBA exam this year? What's the reason for that?
Look, they don't tell us. So even as a partner, and you'll know this as well in your chapters, what happens with the exam is a completely separate process. So there has been, but my suspicion is that because a lot of ECBAs who come into the field haven't gone into strategic level where they're doing deep dive analysis, they've left it out because it's not necessarily relevant to prove that the person has the capability to enter the field. And also those 2 chapters weren't huge in terms of the amount of questions that were in the exam anyway. So I suppose it made it easier for people to, answer be able to understand that a little bit better.
Okay, thank you. Stefan is asking, why do you think they removed the solution evaluation from the ECBA exam? As he thinks it's still an important knowledge area for beginning BAs.
It really is. It really is. And this is why I say I don't want anyone who's going through the efforts of getting certified to just dump 2 chapters from your BABOK. You are wasting your own learning if you do that. So I 100% agree with you because it involves a lot of analysis actually, which is where our name comes from, the title comes from. So I think particularly with the solution evaluation, it's potentially because, it's not about the requirements. So I think that there's a real focus on the requirements so that people can get job ready. But I agree that if you're a business analyst, you need to know how to analyze things. Like that's a fundamental, I would say.
Okay. I have here a question from Daisy. How does one fill up the hours on the IIBA website? Can you give some insights in it? I know that we handled this topic already in an earlier session, but maybe you can give some quick heads
So
up.
let me just, how do you fill up the hours on the IIB? Okay, so that's just the application that you're doing on the IIBA. They've got different categories. So you'll just be asked, you've got to become a member, you've got to register with them. And then you need to go into the site and complete your number of professional development hours. So if you go through a registered training provider like ourselves, our training is already pre-approved. So in other words, when you go there and you say, I've had this training, you upload the certificate and it's pre-approved. And that happens with any training partner. So anyone that's got the EEP endorsed certificate has that. If you've gone and done self-study or you've gone to a course that isn't endorsed, you need to provide evidence that you've gone for learning. And that is also done on the IIBA site. Now, they are really good at helping people get their applications in. Remember, this is the work of the IIBA. This is why they're there, to help people get certified. So when you go to the primary site, if you have any concerns, use the help. They're very proactive and they will help you complete those application forms. So the first thing you need to do is go in, put in an application. They will sometimes audit you. So the audit process is just to make sure that what you've said matches, the paperwork. And sometimes they don't audit everybody, but they will help you complete that information by providing you the guidance that you need.
Mm-hmm. And then, so you need to split each topic and the hours, and not just putting everything cumulative. Huh? It's like
Correct.
splitting it up specifically.
So if you've had training from a training provider, so like ourselves, we've already split the training into the different modules. So you can just upload the joint, hours. But if you haven't, like let's say you go through your study group in the chapter, you're going to have to say how many hours you spend studying on each of the chapters of the BABOK guide. So you have to justify those hours related. So it does depend on how you received your learning. That does make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see also some questions passing by regarding the presentation itself. So we will send afterwards, we will send out a wrap up with the PDF of the slides, and we will send out also a recording of the full session, so you can rewatch it later on as well.
Yes.
I also see an interesting question here from Hassan. He's an engineering student, and he's asking if Agora Insights can do something for the ECBA masterclass course.
So we do run the masterclass course, if that's what you mean. I'm not quite sure.
It's meaning, he's got he's having trouble with the budget.
Can you gift one?
Yes, exactly.
Potentially, yes. Although we are offering, a special with this, so there is a 50% discount for those signing up who've joined our webinar. For those who want to come through this, so there is a code which you'll be able to download the material. There is free material to use that breaks down the learning blueprint. There are free webinars on the site, and there is actually, which I'll share with you on the screen in a moment. There is a lot of free material you can use, and then you can redeem quite a big discount, which So I just want to quickly show you now. If you see here, ECBA on your IIBA website, and then you'll see it. You'll say, who's ECBA? And then there's this little button here that says, learn about competencies. And as I mentioned, these are the competencies you need to know as a ECBA. And you'll see, like, for instance, in 3.1, it'll tell you all of the competencies you need to be able to demonstrate in an exam. So that has all of those linked. So they're really important to understand that this is what you're being tested on. You've been tested if you have general awareness of the business formality. Do you follow the rules when it comes to applying or choosing the approach, whether it be predictive or not? So yeah. So are there any other questions? Because I'm going to open up another spreadsheet for you now to have a look.
Okay, so we do have another question from Carolina. She is asking if there is any way on providing the BABOK access in the course. I must say that all IIBA members, they automatically have access to BABOK PDF. They also have like an interactive guide within the BABOK, which they have access to. Last month, we also had a conference here in Brussels. It was in these times, it was an online conference where we gifted away a hard copy of the BABOK guide. So also these chances are there. So feel free to visit and then look around wherever these BABOK guides are there.
Yes. So, I mean, the BABOK guide is available if you're a member, and it is good to be a member because you get your exam cheaper. So if you're planning to get certified, you know, you might as well become a member, get your free guide, and then get your exam cheaper. So that makes logical sense. We do, can you see this screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So what we do is we provide assistant materials. So in other words, breaking down how all of the different components of your BABOK guide look. So for instance, in chapter 3, we look at the business analysis approach. We look at the key things you need to focus on in terms of elements, and we link it to the learning objective. Same thing with techniques. I've just put on a filter here, which I will somehow take off. But we have all of the techniques that are used. I'm just trying to find my filter. Sorry about this. Oh, there we go. I filtered it on this one. So these are all the techniques in your BABOK guide. Each one has a definition, and it'll show you where it's being used. So you'll see, let's say in chapter 3.1, these are all the techniques that are referred to in that particular chapter. So you can break down your BABOK guide, and there's many ways to learn. This is the key thing, you know, there's not just one way to learn. Some people like videos, some people like to read, some people like to be told a story and really understand the background. So you need to know how you learn, and you know, what's the quickest way for you to learn. So if you're a reader, great, pick up the BABOK guide and read it. If you're not a reader, you probably need to look at some other ways to do that. Practice tests, you know, joining your study groups, making sure that you're getting feedback from a mentor or a fellow BA who has been certified. You know, so there's many ways you can do this, and you can do it. You just have to be prepared. I mean, it still is, you know, it requires some background and some knowledge. Any other questions?
Yes, Sonia is asking, the BABOK Blueprint is a different document than the BABOK V3. If yes, how can I get it if I'm already an IIBA member?
Okay, so do you mean this? So in our session today, the blueprint handout from our company is available free of charge, which will break down the different components. So, but everything that you need is provided by IIBA. So we provide the explanation of how to use it, but I've just shown you a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet is basically all of these components. So we've just matched the chapter with the competency, But as you can see, IIBA provides you everything. So the only thing you need to do in terms of your BABOK to your competency is make sure that you go into IIBA website and that you've got a note of all of this, and you need to match it to the chapter. So we've done that for our learners, but obviously you can do this, you know, for yourself too. I mean, that's just to highlight that it is available there.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Philemon from Nairobi, Kenya. He is having some difficulty in how and where to make registration and payment for the ECBA classes, and subsequently enrolling as an IIBA member. So what's concerning the IIBA, okay, so you can take up contact with us or with IIBA Global, in which they will be very helpful in helping you out to become an IIBA member. So for the classes, I'm referring more to Deirdre. I think that she will also be helpful in helping Philemon out. If
Yeah,
take up
I
contact.
mean, I'm not a big one for kind of selling things here. I mean, we're here to really help, but we do have, you know, masterclass available for ECBAs to specifically help them from start to finish with their journey in terms of their training. So we have quite a comprehensive course. It is 36 hours all up. In terms of just the videos and the learning, and then a library and a whole lot of resources. So that's quite simply, you can register online. And like I said, you can make use of this 50% discount that we do have just for people who are on the webinar. So it's just for the Brussels chapter. And obviously just reach out if you have any questions directly.
Okay. We have here an interesting question from Olivia Hampton. She's asking, are there any techniques more commonly tested than others? So any key techniques that we need to focus on?
Yes, good question. All right, so if we go to the techniques, now I've got to just find that filter again. Oh, I did it on this one. Let me get rid of all the filters. 50 techniques. It looks quite daunting when you first look at it, and each technique is described independently in each task. So there's some trickery there that you need to know about. But if we go to the countdown, workshops, surveys, this is risk analysis. Yep. And then the biggest one is interviews. Now, what people do get asked a lot about is use case in the exam. And so you should definitely know about that. There are questions around data. So when we look at data modeling and data mining, there are questions around that, and they do like to ask questions around processes. So you can look at the frequency. So for instance, some of these that are in chapter 6 and chapter 8 only or exclusively, you don't even need to worry about. But any of them that are in chapters, you know, particularly chapter 7. So for instance, if we go here, these are typically the techniques that will present themselves. Now, I haven't seen any questions around sequence diagrams, but that's not to say there won't be, but you can see if we go into here that sequence diagrams appears, is it once? Yeah, in your BABOK guide. So, you know, so although there are 50 techniques, it might just be mentioned once or twice, and then it's not that regular. Like here's another one that's not that regular. I think it's the glossary. Yeah, the glossary. So you might be asked a question about that, but I would really focus on your processes, your data, For CBAPs, I always recommend that you make sure you know estimation, financial, anything finance you need to know. But for your ECBAs, I would focus more on process modeling, use cases, and potentially look at your workshops, your interviews, and those things that are very much around your customer engagement or your stakeholder engagement.
Okay, we have a question. Is it possible for an individual to transition to the next level after passing ECBA exams and enroll immediately?
Of course, it's possible. It's not advisable. The reason it's not advisable is because the exams are very different. So although you learn the same content, your test is very different. So it's great from an ECBA perspective where you've gone and you've written the test and you've understood the fundamental basics. But if you go, let's say you want to move to CCBA. So if we go to CCBA and we look at your learning blueprint, your competencies, you will see that the competencies have changed. And so what happens is that they start asking you more complex questions and they start bridging chapters across each other. So remember, you're not going to be asked any questions on chapters 6 and 8 as an ECBA. But when you go into the next level, CCBA, now you are going to be asked more complex questions, like just the fact that you modify the rules, which means you have to reason a scenario based on what you think and not necessarily what BABOK prescribes. So I don't recommend it. It's great to learn your BABOK guide, but if you are intending to do CCBA, don't bother doing ECBA first. Focus on getting CCBA. So focus on the certification that you want, and that will help you learn appropriately because they are different.
Okay. Sonia is asking if the results, the score and the pass-fail status will be provided right after the exam, or will it take a while?
Right afterwards. Yeah.
Right
so
afterwards.
you'll know.
Okay.
You'll know immediately. I don't know if that's good or bad, but let's say it's good.
Okay. I see a remark here from Stefan. So indeed, there is only a need for registering with the IIBA. You don't need to become a member to enroll into the exam. So it's not needed, although it's a bit cheaper if you become an IIBA member first. That's for sure. Mohammed is asking a question: how long is an ECBA application valid?
When you say valid, you mean how long can you hold the application for?
Yes. Yes.
As far as I know, and somebody might need to correct me, but I checked this recently, you hold your ECBA certification forever. It's different with your CCBA and your CBAP, where you have to renew every 3 years. But the ECBA proves that you have the entry-level competency. It's not proving that you have experience.
Okay.
So I will have to check that. So take that with a pinch of salt. But from what I recently read up, that was you don't need to have any further work beyond ECBA.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We have a question on how many hours or how much time is needed for studying for the ECBA certification. So Sanghmitra is working full-time, so I'm not able to dedicate much time for studying, and it makes him a bit frustrated.
Yeah. So look, there are multiple study ways that you can use. So one of the things that we do look at is a study plan. So what you can do is you can go chapter by chapter and say, each week I'm going to spend 1 hour or 2 hours and just focus on those particular areas. The important thing is to plan it. Now, you only need 21 hours of professional development, but you need more hours to study. So even though it says 21 hours of professional development, I would say at least double or triple that in time, so that you can get practice exams in, so that you can make sure that you asking the right questions, that you're preparing. When I say practice exams, is you can't just read the BABOK guide, and I'm stressing this, you can't read the BABOK guide and say, I'm ready to write the exam. It won't work. You have to do some practice tests. Now, IIBA does give you an example of that on their website. So let's just quickly go there. And you need to be exam ready. Now, this is important because you can't read the guide for like 10 minutes and then go, oh yeah, I think I'm going to be ready to write this exam. And then you sit for an hour and you get overwhelmed and stressed, and then you're not ready. So particularly for CBAP, for instance, or CCBA, I always advise people to be able to sit for 3 to 4 hours to see if they can actually manage the exam. So for ECBA, luckily, it's a much easier exam and it's shorter, but you still need to be fit. So you still need to practice. So if we look at our, let's just quickly go, test your knowledge, some sample questions. These are the kind of questions you'll be asked. So in our training, we break that down for you and say how they derived the answer, how they found the answer. But you're going to need to have a whole lot of practice tests, and there are multiple companies that provide this. And practice an exam, do simulations, do drills, practice that. So reading the BABOK guide is one thing, but it will not get you to pass your exam unless you're a really special person. And for the average Joe, like the rest of us, we have to practice first and do some tests and do further learning.
How many practice tests are there in the ECBA masterclass?
1,000.
So
a lot. Some of them are very simple, like super, we'll ask a question, which stakeholder does this? Because one thing you want to do is start memorizing some of the things in your BABOK guide. And then some of them are more questions like this, which is, where would you find this answer? Where does it come from? So, so that people can start understanding the BABOK guide, not just memorizing it, but understanding why they're getting this question. So in your IIBA website, on your IIBA website, you get actual exam examples here. So these are questions you are highly likely to be asked in the exam. So they just take some from the randomization bank. So I always say, if you can answer these and score 100%, then at least you're on the right track. But if you look at these and go, what is this? Then you probably need a lot more learning to go from there.
Okay. I got another question from Olivia. Is knowing the technique definition enough for the ECBA, or do we need to know when to use each technique?
It's a combination. Now, there are a couple of those techniques that have definitions in your BABOK guide in chapter 10. And so, like, for instance, you would need to know on interviews, some of the key principles on interviews. So you need to know both. So your question was, do I need to just know this or know some of the, you need to know both. And again, it's not so much about memory, it's more around understanding why they're saying that. So if you can understand that, then it becomes easier. So definitions are very important for ECBA, but also knowing when those techniques are used in specific tasks and elements in those chapters.
Okay, thank you. We are currently out of questions. I see just one remark from Stefan that he made exactly the same spreadsheet on the BABOK version 2 when doing his CBAP exam in 2012. So
did you? Well done, Stefan. So great minds, right?
And also have a remark from Christophe that he says that the ECBA has no time expirancy, probably due to the fact that the CCBA and CBAP provide a certification and ECBA is only a certificate.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you want to share something else on your screen, or can I take over again?
I
So,
think you can take over. I'll
okay.
check if there's anything that I need to
Okay.
quickly pop, but yeah, it should be all good.
Okay. So then I will take over again. We would like to thank you very much, Deirdre, for this interesting session full with new insights on the ECBA certification. So the presentation slides and the blueprint as well will be sent out afterwards, as well as the recording of this session. In name of the IIBA Brussels chapter, we would like to offer you this certificate of appreciation. So before we close up for tonight, we wanted to ask all of you as an audience for some feedback on our session of today. If you can go to Mentimeter, so www.menti.com, and use the code 54003461, and you can give us some feedback on this webinar, that would be great. So you can maybe do that straight away. Thank you very much. There is also a second screen which will give you some takeaways. So what is your takeaway from this webinar? So it would be great to have your ideas in this one as well. You can continue filling this more and we will have a look on it later on, and we will share, of course, our thoughts on that one afterwards in our wrap up. Next to our weekly online BA Cafe, where you can know BAs from all over the world in an informal chat. So we have on May 27th a session on agile analysis with Trent Leopold, where he will give you some insights on the agile part of business analysis and give some ideas on techniques specific to that vision. And on June 17th, we have a session on collaboration with John Fraser, Will Pitchers, and Shane Lacani. And we are also working on some sessions for our French community here in Belgium and Luxembourg. Thank you for attending our webinar, and we are ready to close up for today. Thank you a lot, and then hope to see you next time.